Lantern of Memories. Victor Marlow, a reclusive historian with a penchant for uncovering ancient mysteries, carefully navigated the dimly lit corridors of the Forgotten Tomb. His expedition had been grueling, but he was driven by the promise of unearthing artifacts lost to time. As his lantern flickered in the stale air, his eyes landed on a peculiar object half buried in the dirt. Gently, he brushed away the dust to reveal a strange lantern. It was unlike anything he had seen before, a blackened metal casing with swirling, vine-like etchings. The glass panels were cloudy, but when he peered closer, faint green light seemed to flicker within. His heartbeat quickened. This was no ordinary find. This was history made tangible. The air in the tomb was suffocating, and the faint, acrid scent of decay clung to everything. Victor lit the lantern out of curiosity. As the pale green flame sprang to life, the room filled with an eerie glow. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the walls, writhing like living things. He felt a strange pull, as though the flame was reaching into him, tugging at something deep within. The sensation was unnerving, but Victor dismissed it as exhaustion from hours of excavation. That night, back in his study, Victor couldn't stop thinking about the lantern. He set it on his desk, staring at the peculiar glow. As he watched, the flame began to pulse, faint shapes forming in the light. He blinked, thinking it was a trick of his tired eyes. But the shapes solidified into hazy figures, a woman in a flowing dress, a man holding a staff, and a great hall filled with people. The visions were fleeting but vivid, leaving Victor's skin prickling with unease. The next morning, Victor dove into his research, searching for any references to the lantern. Ancient texts hinted at an artifact called the Lantern of Malith, said to reveal forgotten histories. It was an object of great power and great danger. Legends warned that the lantern's flame fed on its user's mind, offering visions of the past at the cost of their sanity. Victor scoffed at the warnings. He was a man of reason, not superstition. That evening, he lit the lantern again. This time, the visions were clearer. He saw a city with spires that pierced the heavens, its streets bustling with people who bore a strange, otherworldly grace. The buildings shimmered as if made of crystal, and the air hummed with an unearthly energy. It was beautiful, yet profoundly unsettling. Victor felt as though he didn't belong in the vision, like an intruder in a place that had long since vanished. The visions began to haunt him. Each time he lit the lantern, the scenes became more vivid and more disturbing. He saw battles fought with monstrous writhing creatures, rituals performed before towering idols of indescribable forms, and an endless library filled with books that whispered when opened. These weren't just glimpses of history. They were memories, memories he felt were becoming his own. Victor's nights grew restless. He dreamt of the city he had seen, but now it was in ruins, its spires broken, its streets choked with ash. He wandered the desolation, hearing faint voices calling his name. When he woke, he found himself speaking words he didn't understand, his fingers unconsciously tracing the lantern's swirling patterns. By the third week, Victor's sense of time began to waver. He couldn't remember how long he had been studying the lantern, or how much time had passed since his last meal. The flame had grown brighter, its green light casting shifting shadows across his study. He tried to write down his observations, but the pages filled with strange symbols he didn't recognize. He realized with a chill that they matched the patterns on the lantern. One night, Victor decided to stop. He extinguished the lantern and locked it in a chest. But the whispers persisted, creeping into his mind like a parasite. His reflection in the mirror seemed wrong, his eyes sunken, his face gaunt. And the dreams, they were no longer of the ruined city, but of a vast, endless void. In the center of the void stood a figure, robed in flowing black, its face hidden. The figure whispered a name, Malith. Unable to resist, Victor unlocked the chest and lit the lantern once more. This time, the flame roared to life, and the room around him dissolved. He found himself standing in the endless library from his visions. Shelves stretched infinitely in all directions, filled with books bound in materials that looked organic, almost alive. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and something fouler, something rotting. The robed figure stood before him, its presence overwhelming. "You have seen what should not be seen," it intoned, its voice reverberating in Victor's skull. "Knowledge has a price." Victor tried to speak, but his voice was gone. The figure extended a hand, and the books around him opened, their pages turning violently. The whispers grew deafening, a cacophony of voices overlapping, drowning out his thoughts. He realized in a moment of horror that the lantern had been leading him here all along, not to learn, but to serve. The visions weren't just memories of the past, they were fragments of Malith's shattered existence, pieces of a god trying to reassemble itself. The figure stepped closer, its shrouded form growing impossibly tall, casting Victor in a shadow that seemed to leach the warmth from his very soul. He could feel his mind unraveling, strands of thought fraying and snapping like cobwebs in a gale. Memories he held dear, his childhood home, his first discovery as a historian, the faces of those he loved, slipped away, dissolving into the suffocating silence of the library. In their place came alien images, fragments of an ancient and unfathomable existence. A sky choked with black suns, oceans that boiled and whispered, and beings with forms that defied comprehension. Victor fell to his knees, clutching his head as the whispers grew into a maddening roar. The books around him pulsed with life, their organic bindings throbbing like heartbeats. Pages fluttered violently, releasing a nauseating stench of decay. The figure raised an arm, and Victor felt a force tugging at his essence, pulling him toward the lantern. He tried to resist, clawing at the floor, but his fingers sank into the fleshy surface beneath him, which writhed and squelched in response. He screamed, though no sound came from his mouth. His reflection appeared in the lantern's glass, but it was twisted, unrecognizable. His features were elongated and grotesque, his eyes glowing with the same sickly green light as the flame. The reflection smiled, a cruel, knowing grin that sent a wave of terror through him. It was not his smile, it was Malith's. The green light surged, enveloping Victor entirely. He felt himself dissolving, his body and mind disintegrating into threads of energy that were drawn into the lantern's core. In his final moments of awareness, he understood the terrible truth. He was becoming part of the library, another vessel for Malith's forbidden knowledge, trapped for eternity in the labyrinth of ancient, unspeakable horrors. When Victor's colleagues found his study weeks later, the room bore the unsettling marks of madness. His notes lay scattered across the floor, their once meticulous handwriting devolved into jagged alien symbols that seemed to shift when stared at for too long. The air was heavy with a suffocating sense of wrongness, a lingering presence that prickled at the edges of their minds. At the center of the chaos sat the lantern, cold and unlit, its glass panels smeared with faint, greasy handprints as though someone had desperately tried to extinguish it. Yet even in its dormant state, it exuded a sinister aura, the kind that made one's skin crawl. As they stood in the oppressive silence, someone swore they heard faint whispers threading through the air, soft, insidious murmurs in a language that seemed to claw at their understanding. And when the shadows lengthened in the dying light of day, the lantern's glass caught the faintest flicker of green, a pulse like a heartbeat, as though it awaited its next victim.